Good morning. My name is Kirk, and we are at the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum of Connecticut. Today we're going to talk about post-war consumer television, and we're going to look at the display that we have and talk about some early models and their significance. Just a little bit of background on this. Television was available prior to World War II, but it wasn't mainstream. You had experimental stations and experimental markets. It wasn't until after World War II that the television became a mass-produced consumer item and was available to the public in large numbers. Therefore, that's where we're going to start here. RCA in late 1946 geared up to produce consumer televisions, and they started with the Model 630. This was in late 46. They did not produce a lot of them at that time. They were licensed and produced a lot of them later. But one of the first sets that they did produce in early 47 is here on display. It's called the 721. This was actually a pre-war design and pre-war Vassos type cabinet. It was priced at around $350. Good performer, and it had a complement set to it. This is also considered a 721, but it has a radio and a phonograph in it. This was about $350, like I said. This one was about $800. So $350 in 1947 money was about $5,000. $800 in this one is like over $7,000 in today's money. So there was a significant problem here with the cost of these items. In order to try to combat that, Pilot came out with a set in late 47, early 48 that was the first set to be sold for under $100. It was $99. It had a 3-inch screen. You can purchase a magnifier for it that would help you be able to see it better. But again, for $100, which in today's money would be about $450, this was not practical. At the same time, Motorola stepped up and they came out with a lower priced set, which they sold a lot of these. This is called the VT71. This set sold for $179 in late 1947, early 48. And it brought the price down, but again, you had a 7-inch picture. It wasn't very practical. And again, this one was available with an oil-filled magnifier. And there were a lot of these available, as a novelty that you could buy. But again, that was a lot of money. You weren't getting a lot of television for all that money. At the same time, DuMont Laboratories, which you can do a whole video just on Alan DuMont. In fact, you could do many videos on RCA. DuMont came out with this set in 48 called the Chatham. It was called a doghouse by people because of the way it looked. This set was $500. Again, this was $500 in 1948, would be north of $6,000 today. DuMont was famous for engineering. For its time, this set performed really, really good. And this was one of their lower price models, and it had a built-in FM radio. So up until this point of the sets I just pointed out, you either had unaffordable or poor performer. It wasn't until 1949 that sets like this RCA T100 and this GE 10-inch set became available where they were able to bring the price down enough and bring the performance up enough to where the television really became mainstream. And these are the first years where they started to sell sets in the millions. In fact, the millionth set, I think, was around late 49, early 1950. These two sets here, the GE and the RCA, would have been direct competitors in 1949. This set broke the price barrier by being under $200, $199.95. Performed very well. RCA strategically placed a lot of these sets in bars, restaurants, hotel lobbies to get people to see it. Sporting events, and they sold these. These two sets here broke the market open. This General Electric set sold for $239, a little more expensive than the RCA, and GE had done many things in their manufacturing process to try to bring the price down, because that's what they need to do. They need to get the price down, the reliability up. So these two sets, if you were around back then, if you were a young person in the late 40s, and you had first saw television, you probably saw one of these, because these would have been more mainstream, again, because these were inexpensive and they didn't work well. This one was expensive and worked well. And these were very early and very expensive. And this one was pretty much, didn't work well, and is more of an, I consider to be a novelty. Now, stepping into the late 40s and early 50s here, Zenith came out with a set called a porthole. And what they really did was they kind of exploited the fact that the picture tube was round. All these sets, when you look carefully at them, the tube is round. The manufacturer just did a little trick here with geometry to mask the fact that it was round, because they weren't able to manufacture it as a rectangle yet because of implosion problems. They would be able to do it very soon. So Zenith exploited that by saying, our set is a porthole set. They called it a porthole set, and you had Commander McDonald, who was in charge of Zenith, who was big into his yachts. They would use yachts in the advertising. And another thing that they were doing is they were combining the television, the radio, and the phonograph into one unit. And this would continue for the next 20 years or so. In the wings, at this time, in early 1950s, CBS and NBC RCA were in parallel courses to develop color television. CBS came up with a mechanical system, and the FCC actually licensed it. RCA came up with an electronic system and convinced the FCC that it would be better to have it to be electronic and compatible with the black and white sets that were out there already. The FCC reversed course in the fall of 1953 and rewarded the NTSC format to RCA for color television. RCA already had a set, a prototype, ready for this licensure. And it was this set right here. This is an RCA Model 5. This set was hand-produced in late 1953. Some sources say they made 100 of them. Some sources say they made 200 of them. This set was specifically manufactured to demonstrate electronic color to the world. And what RCA did was they manufactured these by hand, and they distributed them to 21 markets around the United States, large markets, to their affiliates, to NBC affiliates, because NBC was owned by RCA at the time. The subject was the Tournament of Roses parade on January 1st, 1954. And it was a challenge because this was the first time that not only did they broadcast color for the first time to a large market, it was done in uncontrolled conditions. It was outside. It was dependent on the lighting and the weather. The big thing here was to show that this was practical. they weren't using, they had two studios at the time that they could use for color, and one was in New York and one was in Burbank, California. But this was outside for the public to see, and it was done live, which I think took a lot of bravery. And it went, from all reports, it went well. This set here is one of the prototypes that was sent out. So people, we don't know where this set was on the day of the broadcast. We do know where it came from. We had a gentleman in Massachusetts who was 86 years old that called us and wanted to donate the set to us so people could see it. He worked for RCA and his father worked for RCA as well. And they both worked in Princeton, New Jersey. So that's where that's where these came from. These actually, I think they were assembled in Camden. But nevertheless, this set is one of the sets that was put out there for the original broadcast, the Tournament of Roses. And we're very fortunate to have it here and on display for people to come and see. And know its historic value. We chose to leave it unrestored in its original condition that it was sent out. We did an electronic inspection on it and found that no repairs were ever made to this. So it's likely that it was displayed and then brought back to the laboratories and put away. Most of these were destroyed. They know of 10. This was the 10th one to be found. Moving over to the next era here, we start in the 1950s. And television really took off in the 50s. In fact, this is dubbed the golden era of television. So Admiral came out with a set that was made from Bakelite. And in their advertising, they showed how strong the cabinet was. And they sold these in pretty good numbers. People thought it was a nice idea and everything, but really the reason for doing it, for the most part, was to cut down costs. It cost a lot less to mold a cabinet in a machine than to have cabinet makers build these on an assembly line. We'll get down to these sets on the bottom in a minute. This set here, this True Tone, was sold by Western Auto. And it's a 1956 model. These sets, this one and this Hot Point here, and the Admiral there, we call these like 55 Chevy TVs. These sets went for about $100. And just to know that when we were looking at the other display, for $100, 10 years prior, this is what you were able to get for $100. For $179, this is what you got. So 10 years, not even later, this is what you got for $100. So the price came down significantly, and these sets here were sold in very large numbers. In fact, this set here, it's not going to behave for me today. That was another thing. We had a lot of the TV repair shops. It was a big business because you never knew when something was going to work or not. This one will work after. This was a $100 set in 1950. This is a $100 set, 1956, 57. So you can see that the price was coming down significantly. What a cut. So during the 1950s, color development continued. The first broadcast that we just talked about was a success. But the problem was getting the price down, getting the programming out there. to shoot color television, color programs was expensive. You had to have special lighting, special studios, the makeup that was required for the actors and actresses that was extensive. But by the end of the 1950s, development had come to the point where it was starting to become practical for people to buy a color set. Here we have a 1960 model. This is called a CTC-11, Color Television Chassis number 11. RCA numbered their chassis. And we have its black and white complement, a similar model in black and white, to demonstrate. These sets would have been sold side by side in a dealer showroom. Dealerships were brand specific back then. You didn't sell your competitor's sets. If you sold RCA, you were an RCA dealer. Many of them were exclusive. So this set would have been around $500 or $600 in 1960. This set would have been around $250 in 1960. To get the cost down again, these cabinets are made out of steel. These are both what are called leader models. They would be the lowest price model that you could buy. A lot of these sets were in restaurants and bars. For home use, you had legs. You screwed the legs onto it. Same thing with this one. But in 1960, NBC had one show a night in color. And they almost all originated from Burbank. Then they would have a special every week that they rotated the shows through color. So Dinah Shore was always in color. Laramie was always in color. Bonanza was always in color. Sometimes the news was in color. Sometimes they had a special that was sent out to the affiliates in color. The Wonderful World of Disney was always in color. So as the 60s, the beginning of the 60s progressed, NBC started putting 2 shows a night. Maybe an afternoon show. And little by little, by the fall of 1966, all of their programming was in color. And ABC fell in right after them, and CBS, I believe, was last. But by the 1966-67 year, everything was in color. And at that point, the medium took off. It was really not cost effective to buy a set like this in 1960 when you only had one show a night in color. But as you can see here, it was compatible. You could remove the color or add the color. In fact, the way this works is that the black and white signal is sent out and the color signal is sent out at the exact same time, and they were superimposed upon one another. We called it coloring book, because really that's the way it works. And that's what the compatibility trick was all about, was getting the color to work with the existing, I think it was 7 million black and white sets that were out there at the time. And I find it fascinating, and myself and others here have made this a lifetime interest, just to study the engineers and the people that were able to figure this out, especially the lighting and the color, the science of colors. And it's a big deal. This was really a big deal. And we spend quite a bit of our time here just sitting around jaw-jacking and just talking about the big deal. At the same time, as we come up here, we had other developments going on that were to finalize the leave the infancy of television. 1959, Philco was the first company to come up with a battery-powered, portable, all-transistor television. This one is unrestored. And it was dubbed the Safari because you could take it out and bring it anywhere. And it was a projection set. It has a 1-inch picture tube, so it's not solid state to the point where the whole set is solid state. It has a picture tube, and it has what we call a high voltage rectifier tube. But the chassis itself is solid state. And they put all the research and development and spent all the money on it. This set was quite expensive. It was about $300, which was a lot of money back then. And they didn't sell a whole lot of them. The real boom for portable televisions, black and white televisions, came when Sony came out with this model here. They called it the Micro TV in 1962. Not only was it attractive and it looked mainstream, but it worked really well. Quick story about that is Frank Sinatra was shown this set in 1962 when he was in Tokyo on either entertaining or on business. When he saw that, he had to have it. So, but he wanted to make sure that the set was reliable and it would do everything he wanted. He didn't mind paying up, but Frank Sinatra was into having the latest and the greatest electronics, and he wanted that. So they immediately went back to the factory and wanted to make 2 of these for Frank Sinatra. And what they did was they sent a couple of their engineers from Japan to Los Angeles, and they had the thing and they were speeding around on I-5 in a limousine with this television in it to make sure that it would work at any speed, going over bumps, and they were stopped by the police. And they asked what they were doing. They showed they were testing this TV out for Frank Sinatra to make sure that he would be happy with it. And I don't know if they got a ticket or not. But this set became very popular. It was sold with a hat box, so it's made to appeal to all audiences. I have to watch what I say here. And this was the beginning of the end of the American manufacturing dominance in the consumer electronics market. Right here, you're looking at it. 1965, Matsushita, which is Panasonic, came up with this portable. And the Japanese were very conscious of price. It's called price point. They priced their items to be a tad below the American items. And like they did with the cars 20 years later, they worked good. These things were priced well and they worked good. Around 1967, General Electric broke into the color portable market by making the first set that was sold for under $200, the GE Portacolor. When we wanted to use this today, it had a failure, but we'll have it working. This set was sold from around late 67, early 68, up until the late 1970s, in many variations to Portacolor. And there's an old saying in the business, if there's a cheap way to make something, GE invented it. And they started out with this one, 1949. It had a low price and it worked good, and they sold zillions of them. It's not really a word, I would say millions. 1967, low price, worked good, sold millions. And there's still a lot of these around today. When we get into the 1970s, the sets again were becoming smaller, solid state, and arguably unremarkable. These became very reliable. Quasar, which is the name of that one, made its name by making sets that were serviceable by having circuit boards that worked in a drawer. Not that set, but their color sets. Japan Victor Corporation, JVC, came up with this novelty set, which is very popular today if you could find one. Japan Victor Corporation, JVC, is more noted for another invention that they came up with that we can talk about on another day, called the VHS recorder and the VHS format. From here, we kind of end the consumer sets there. The miniature remember we talked about 1962 and Sony and how they miniaturized the set. And here you can see we have many models that are the result of that miniaturization. And these are all from the 1980s and early 90s. And if you don't think Sony was way ahead of their time, just take a look at these and take a look at that 1962 set. How similar they are. And Sony they just got it right. So a lot of these novelty sets are the result of that first. They followed the leader of that first set from 1962. And they were able to emulate the original. One set that I want to talk about just for a moment here before we end our talk is something that really didn't take off. And this is the 1958 to 59 Philco Predicta. It was the Predicta series. There were 3 different sets that they made, but they all worked the same way. The idea here was to make this set like a 1930s or 40s chairside radio, where you could take the screen and move it to a different part of the room and have the controls, in this case, right next to you, next to your chair, and the sound. And you can control this from where you sat and put the screen anywhere you wanted in the room. And the idea was that this would be in a bedroom or a room that you would want to be able to move it around. And what it did was it eliminated a remote control. However, it was plagued with problems. This cable connected the picture tube to the control unit, which was the entire chassis. And that cable, had to carry all the signals to the picture tube. And it also carried about 8,000 volts of second anode voltage to light this tube. And the instructions told you it was okay to put that cable underneath the carpet or behind furniture. And these were manufactured in pretty big numbers. The reliability on these was below bad. And subsequently, this put the hurt on Philco. The reason a lot of these survive is because of they're just ostentatious, unique. You have to say that Philco did hit it out of the park with the looks, and it certainly represents the times. But they just didn't stand up. They just didn't work well, and they were dangerous. So hopefully you picked up a little information here about the early television genre. And our offering here again is mainstream sets that you would have seen in someone's home between 1947 and around 1980. Thank you very much. And I hope you get to come down and see us and take a look in person here. Take care.